I'm going to talk about the principles of management of periprosthetic fractures around total hip replacements and total knee replacements. I am Dr. Arindam Banerjee, and I am making this presentation from Kolkata, India. Let's first analyze the magnitude of the problem. Worldwide, 3.6 million TKRs and 1 million THRs are done. These figures are from 2024, and the global market value of this is $7.8 billion. This is based on the life science intelligence platform, and it's quite possible that many things are not recorded, so this figure may be less than what we expect. 40% of these replacements are done in the USA. If we look at the figure for India, then nearly 150,000 knees to 200,000 knees are done every year, and roughly 30,000 to 50,000 total hip replacements during the same period. This figure is increasing at about 10 to 15% annually. It's quite possible that the actual number will be more than this, as many of the total joint replacements are not recorded officially, and they don't appear in the joint registry in India. So what are periprosthetic fractures? Basically, a periprosthetic fracture is a broken bone which occurs near, around, or adjacent to an artificial joint replacement. So this could be in the upper limb or in the lower limb. It could be a total knee, hip, a total shoulder, or an elbow prosthesis. And for today's lecture, we're going to just concentrate on the lower limb, because otherwise it will be too unwieldy. The fractures happen either in the intraoperative period or in the postoperative period. The rates of THR during operation are between 0.1 and 3.5% for primary replacements and 3 to 12% for revisions. This is usually either due to forceful broaching, forceful implanting of the prosthesis, or rough reduction. Similarly, for total knee replacements, the figures are 0.2 to 0.4. These are for primary TKRs. And for revisions, the figure is between 5 and 10%. The ratio of the fractures are 3:1 if we compare the femur with the tibia. And the cause is usually forcing a stiff knee to a better position to get better view of the fracture, or slamming the final metal implant. The challenge of fixing these fractures or treating these fractures are not easily understood, because it's not just about fixing the bone. The surgeon must simultaneously evaluate if the anchor of the bone, the bed of the prosthesis, needs proper replacement, fixation, and the artificial joint components often block the implant. Implant options are standard. It could be a buttress plate, it could be a periarticular plate, a locking plate. Various types of nails are used. For instance, in the femur, you could use a retrograde locking nail. You could use the same or you could use an antegrade locking nail as well. In the tibia, of course, this would have to be antegrade nail. Now, when the stem is loose, it's possible that the stem may have to be revised with a larger one, or this revision of the stem might even require various types of augment. So it depends. The implant used really depends on the available space, on the type of fracture, depends on the location of the fracture. It depends on the type of prosthesis we are dealing with. Let's start with the fractures around the hip. The basic classification was the Vancouver classification, and this was based, like most fractures, on A, B, C. A was were fractures around the trochanter, usually the greater, sometimes the lesser. The B fractures were those which involved some part of the prosthesis, and the C fractures are when the prosthesis are below the, when the fracture is below the prosthesis. Now, normally in any classification, the uh, it gets from A to B to C, the fixation gets more and more difficult. But in this situation, it is not so, because A fracture is the easiest to sort out. A C fracture is possibly the second most difficult to sort out. And the worst fractures are, in fact, B fractures, because sometimes they may move the prosthesis and the prosthesis may require a revision. So this classification subsequently was modified by the AO-OTA classification, which tried to create like universal classification, the sort of things which are used for all over the body. And as we know, the prosthesis that is in the hip, and these fractures are usually 31 or 32. And again, apart from the ABC which we have discussed, there are other fractures which they included, like the type D, which is a interprosthetic fracture. So basically, this is for the case where a patient already has a THR and a TKR in situ, and the fracture has happened in between the two. So this makes it more complex because the prosthesis is sitting on both sides of the fracture, and the implant which you use will have to accommodate this geographical situation. Also, in such a case, it may be possible, it's possible that one or more of these uh, implants are rattled by the fracture and need revision. So this is the type D which we are talking about. Then there are type E fractures which affect both bones articulating a joint. So around the knee, for instance, if you have a fracture which is involving both the lower femur and the upper tibia, then that is a more difficult fracture, and that may require surgery on both sides of the joint replacement, which makes it a complicated fracture. Then type F, this is specifically for the hip joint, because this is a fracture which is facing the acetybulum, and that makes again it a little bit more complex. So this is the Lewis and Rora classification of 1997. And here you can see that they have various types, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, you can see here, now here we're talking about fractures around the total knee, not like the previous slide where we were talking mainly about fractures around the total hip. Here you can see RORA 1 is one which you can treat conservatively because it hasn't done much damage. RORA 2 is going through a little bit of the prosthesis which can be dealt with. But if the tibia is unstable, it may need to be revised. Then you have the 3, Lewis and Rora type 3, which is away from the fracture, which is different, and type 4, where the platform of the prosthesis is disturbed. So I've given the picture from both sides because these are three-dimensional fractures which have a lot of complicated geometry. So I've given two sorts of slides so that you can appreciate the classification a little bit better. Then, of course, there is the SU classification, which was made in 2004, which again works on a similar premise. And here it's 1, where the fracture line is away from the prosthesis. 2 is where it is just about touching the edge of the prosthesis. And 3, where it involves really all the parts of the prosthesis. And this is a potentially, again, unstable fracture. So here I think Sue has tried to modify the previous classification and make it a little bit more scientific. Now, the principles of fracture management in the femur can be operative or non-operative. If the fracture is relatively easy to treat, you can get away with casting or bracing, which of course I must warn you is not easy in the femur, but it is possible to do it with modern orthosis. And these are usually non-displaced fractures with stable prosthesis. Operating comes in when you have instability, and when you can sometimes use antegrade intramedullary nail, or occasionally you can use a supracondylar nail through the box, which you may not have in every case. So you have to check the type of prosthesis, the design of the prosthesis, to see if there is space for a supracondylar fracture, which can be fixed with a supracondylar with a retrograde nail. Or occasionally, when there is instability of the prosthesis, then you can look at doing long stem prosthesis. And the indication, of course, is when you have a loose femoral component with poor bone stock. In such a case, again, it's possible that you might have to put both a longer prosthesis as well as a fixation device. The advantage, of course, is that you can do immediate weight bearing, and you can get the patient to mobilize quickly. So this is similar. I showed this X-ray a little while ago, and this is the Felix Mayo classification of fractures around the knee joint. And when you're dealing with a tibial periprosthetic fracture, again, you are left with a situation where you have the option of doing a non-operative procedure. This again could be casting or bracing, which is easier done in a tibia than in a femur, or it could be that an operative procedure needs to be done, or if can be done in some cases, and in some cases, along with the ORIF, a long stem revision prosthesis is required. Depends on the stability of the prosthesis after the fracture. And there is another classification for patellar fractures. When we say patella, we are really talking about the extensor mechanism, and this classification was published by Ortiguera and Berry in 2002. And again, we are looking at non-operative when the patella is the fracture is it has not disrupted the extensor mechanism and everything is intact. You can get away with bracing and extension. And if the extensor mechanism is disrupted, you have to check, is the prosthesis loose or is the prosthesis intact? If the prosthesis is intact, you can get away with a fixation, maybe a tension band wiring or some kind of other wiring, which will restore the extensor mechanism. But if the prosthesis is disrupted, in such a case, it may require various options may have to be taken. It could be an ORIF with partial patelectomy and tendon repair, partial patelectomy, resection and fixation, total patelectomy, or sometimes there may be even component revision. Depends on the type of fracture. Now, all these different classifications which I discussed, Lewis and Rora, then Sue, again, it has been put very elegantly together by the AOTA group, and they have divided again everything into the type A, which is again a stable kind of a fracture where the fracture is around the tibial tubercle, maybe a or which can be treated relatively simply, or it could be a B type of a fracture. Some of these B fractures are stable, like a B1, and sometimes they are loose, but the bone stock is good, like a B2, or sometimes they are both loose and the bone stock is very poor. And in such a case, this is a difficult fracture to treat, the B3. C fractures are again away from the prosthesis, relatively easier to treat. And the D, as I explained, is an interprosthetic fracture. The E is a fracture involving both the articulating surfaces, and the F is involving an unreplaced articular facet. So basically, the aorta group very cleverly have tried to put everything on one platform, which you can understand in the totality. And the other thing we need to remember is that there is a locational basis for all these fractures classifications. So you have the type A, you can see over here, this is a part of the femur. Type A is trochanteric region, B is around the stem, C is below the stem, and D is where there is another implant, or there may or may not be another implant. D is usually when there is another TKR in position. So to summarize all these complicated uh, periprosthetic fractures, I think we need to try to put and tie the entire concept together. So let me start by saying that periprosthetic fractures around the hip and knee are increasingly common because the population is aging and people are living much longer. Also, more and more THRs and TKRs have been done. The indications have been extended. And in addition, a lot of general surgeons, previously only arthroplasty specialists used to do these operations, but nowadays general orthopedic surgeons are also doing these operations. So their results may end up with suboptimal and they may need revisions. And in addition, because the patients are older, they are more fragile, they get these fractures. So more revisions getting, more and more revisions being done means more and more periprosthetic fractures. So while the rate of uh, periprosthetic fractures are only 1 to 3% in primary arthroplasties, they can go up to 20% in revision surgeries. And these fractures often are primarily caused by low energy trauma because the bone is already fragile, the patient is old, and these older patients often have a lot of osteoporosis and they just fall down and end up with a periprosthetic fracture. In addition, the treatment, we've discussed the various classifications and how to treat these fractures. But if we summarize what we've said, the treatment depends on the geometry and the location of the fracture relative to the prosthesis. There is a small percentage of these fractures which can be treated conservatively, but by and large, many of them require surgery. In some cases, we can get away with fracture fixation only, but if the prosthesis is unstable, they will require fixation as well as revision. The surgery of these patients should not be done by occasional surgeons, but should be undertaken by experts in advanced centers where multiple options are available. So they should not be done very casually. Experts should be involved, and you should have the entire kitchen sink in your theater so that you can change your plan midway. After you finish surgery, you should be very sure that the prosthesis is stable, because if you don't stabilize the prosthesis and if you don't fix the fracture properly, you will end up with more problems and you will have more surgery. So to avoid redo surgeries, it's very important that this whatever procedure you are doing, it should be done properly. The biggest worry in these cases is infection, and therefore perfect sterility is mandatory, which brings us again that the centers where these are done should be top class. Because remember, infection in these cases is a disaster, and when you land up with a infection, you might need to do multiple revisions, maybe two-stage surgeries, and often arthrodesis or amputation. So these are situations which you don't want to face. And even if you don't face an amputation, you will at the very least have a situation where clinical results will be very poor and the patient will suffer a lot. Thank you very much.